When most fantasy writers and designers develop their world, they just look at the maps of our Earth and try to replicate it in various ways. You can't blame them for that entirely. After all, what other points of reference do we have? But usually they take it very far. As I talked about in the previous video, often they replicate entire cultures or landforms as they are on Earth. Most worlds are spherical, or oblate spheroids, that revolve around their sun because, again, the writer replicates our real world reference because they don't want to think about making the world operate differently. Sometimes it's not the point. Game of Thrones doesn't need to delve into astronomy or cosmology of its world because it's not the point of the story. The point is, incest ruins the world, I think. But when you are delving into the whole setup of your world, if you want to make it stand out, you should consider deviating from our real-world physiology. And though the main physiogeography, let's and though the main difference of my most recent project, Shewstone, is that it's a flat world encased in several concentric crystal spheres, it carries with it many implications that I think many fantasy writers should consider. What I mean is, imagine any D&D world you recently adventured in. Say, Forgotten Realms, or Eberron, or played in a video game like World of Warcraft or Skyrim. Think of all the places you've been to, of all the areas that have been detailed in the world. You will notice that they mostly take place on the world's surface. Sometimes there is an underground zone, like the Underdark or Hallowfall, and in a vast majority of worlds, that's all you will ever get. Sometimes, on a very rare occasion, there is 1 or 2 underwater zones. But the world, the usually spherical world, ends up feeling very ironically flat, because only 1 or 2 layers are ever considered. So today, I invite you to consider about another implication of a fantasy world that few people think about. Layers. I don't think I need to explain the ground layer to anyone. Virtually every fantasy world has the ground layer, and if you know any that don't, do let me know, because these ought to be interesting. It also needs little explanation, because we live in it. That is really why it's the most ubiquitous. It's the real world layer, where you need to think the least about how different things are, because they mostly are not, unless you consciously decide they are. It's obvious why most stories take place in this layer. It's the familiarity. You don't have to think too hard about how things operate and can just focus on the story. And if that's all you want, it's fine, but things can get much more interesting. The layer that exists on most worlds, but is hardly ever developed into more than just an obstacle for travel, is the sea layer. Most worlds have water. Most worlds have seas. They kinda need to in order to sustain life. But the sea rarely comes up in the stories, except as the thing you go over to reach other places. And I think it really is a shame, because when you look into aquatic life, you see just how much variety of life there is. 72% of Earth's surface is covered in water, and because it's water, it's three-dimensional, and all this life can really differ based on the depth. Oceans have so much biodiversity that we never think about, and have so much potential for fantasy world design. I understand some of the problems with setting fantasy stories in an underwater setting. The first one most people probably think about is, well, most ancestries in D&D can't breathe in water. And my response is, there's quite a few that do. And if you don't have enough of them, design or reflavor some other races to fit an aquatic setting. This is an obstacle only as much as flight at level 1. It's only limited by your imagination. The other major problem with aquatic fantasy settings, especially for D&D, is, as I mentioned when describing this layer, it's three-dimensional. We, as human players, at least I assume, we are all human here, we don't really think in 3 dimensions easily. If you played WoW during the Cataclysm, you'd recall the backlash against the Vashir Zone, because at the start of it, there is a brief segment where enemies can come at you from above and below, while your screen is likely horizontal, so you don't see them as well as enemies on the same level as you. And that segment didn't last very long, but it had a very negative impact. Even today, after many, many years, we still have not really seen another underwater zone. Like hell, when we went to like the Naga capital, the Naga who are aquatic in Warcraft, we went to the Naga capital in a later expansion. The Naga lifted the water out to make it more convenient for us. Think about how strange that is. And of course, in D&D, most people who use battle maps use flat, two-dimensional battle maps, so representing the verticality of an aquatic world is a logistical issue. But okay, here's my solution, on the example of things I have done, as usual. Since the first video about Shewstone, I have added labels for sea zones. And for example, one of them here is called Piskies. It's home to one of the race ideas I put in a lot of my projects, and I usually call them Ichthys. Fun fact, the idea came from this old city builder game called Zeus, Master of Olympus. In the Poseidon expansion, you'd play as Atlantis, and sometimes you'd be attacked by these fish creatures they called ichthyoids, which means literally fish-like. And this made this idea of this race of creatures that looked like the creature from the Black Lagoon that lives in the oceans. I named them Ichthys as a reference to early Christian doctrine, which used Ichthys as a sort of a code name for Jesus. These guys are often very religious because of that association. But here's the thing about Ichthys and any underwater settled civilization. To settle anywhere, to build anything, you need a solid ground. The Ichthys build their towns and their temples on the ocean floor. They harvest the rock and the shells and other materials from the ocean floor. So a lot of their everyday goings-on happen on that relatively horizontal surface. Much of the problematic verticality of the setting is mitigated. And yes, you are in the water, which means you probably can swim up and around enemies, and they can probably swim around you, but all that really means is that everyone has flight from level 1. And in the words of Syndrome, if everyone has flight, then no one does. And the balance is preserved. The Ichthys are, of course, hardly the only underwater race on Shewstone. All existing D&D races still exist here in various forms. Tritons, who I use as the dwarves of the sea, being traditionalists that prefer stability, being the rock against the current. Merfolk, who I use like elves of the sea, mysterious and elegant and dangerous. And all the varieties of frog people D&D has, like bullywugs and grippleys and grungs. We of course have the Lokatha, the Kuatoa, the Sahuagin, the Caecilia, I don't know how to really pronounce the name in English, the sea witch people that were like the merfolk with the lower body of a squid. Each of them has a unique niche in the ocean layer of Shewstone, and I won't delve into every one of them in detail in this video, because it's not the Seas of Shewstone video, but I hope it does give you the idea of how to handle an aquatic layer to a fantasy world. I do want to mention something that I did not write in the script, something that I always like to mention, always like to talk about, is that I have dolphins as an intelligent race. Like, probably not really suitable for a player character, because like they don't have hands with which to like manipulate weapons or cast spells, so they probably can't really be player characters. But they are intelligent creatures that can be like citizens of these underwater communities, but usually the dolphins are these nomadic philosophers of the Seas of Shewstone. I just think it's very interesting. The third layer I wanted to talk about is a layer that is present in a surprising amount of fantasy worlds I know. That layer does give your world a little bit of depth, because it's underground. I think I'm old enough to make dark jokes, okay? The Underdark, Khyber, Blackreach, Azul Nerub, a wide variety of fantasy worlds have some sort of underworld to them. A world of caves and darkness and a surprising amount of mushrooms. A set of caves so thorough that it makes you wonder how the surface world doesn't collapse on itself. Different worlds give it a different level of detail. In the Elder Scrolls, Blackreach only appears in Skyrim and Elder Scrolls Online, and under Skyrim, and it seems mostly localized there. It was of course populated by the Dwemer, the dwarves of Elder Scrolls, who are of course elves, and now it's populated by their victims, the Folmer, who are also elves. Eberron's Khyber, to the best of my knowledge, is mostly just a backdrop. It's a thing that exists that no one canonically mapped. World of Warcraft has introduced a number of underground zones, such as Azul Nerub and Zaralek Caverns and Hallowfall and Harandar. In its lore, Ashakir used to be an underground empire that stretched all under the known world, populated by the insectoid Akir, even if we only see little bits of that today. Probably the most developed version of this is the Underdark of Forgotten Realms. There's actual maps of the Underdark and a lot of cultures and places that have been developed. Like the least of which that I can mention is like places like Menzoberranzan. So I will not dwell a lot on this because we have some very good examples. I do want to make some big design notes on the topic. What I like about Faerun's Underdark is that it has additional layers within the layer. There's 3 major layers called the Upper Dark, the Middle Dark, and the Lower Dark. The deeper you go, the darker and more dangerous it becomes. The Upper Dark, though of course still extremely dangerous, resembles the surface world the most. It's the wild lands full of fungal jungles and dark-dwelling beasts like cloakers and bullets. The Middle Dark is where most Underdark cities are located. Less fertile, less vibrant, more rocky, a good place to anchor and settle any civilizations. And the Lower Dark is the most dangerous one, where the real monsters dwell. Aboleths, Mind Flayers, Kuwatoa, and it is the darkest region where really only magic will illuminate your path. In my flat world of Shewstone, what you need to consider is that the world has a reverse side. Like on a Spelljammer ship, there is a gravity plane going through somewhere in the middle of it. So at some point in the Lower Dark of Shewstone, the gravity flips on you, and if you keep going down, or up, you will eventually emerge into another Middle Dark and another Upper Dark, until you reach the Antichthon. This is one of those things that are pretty unique to my flat world, and which I would not expect in most fantasy worlds, but which I still like to talk about because it inspires some unique fantasy concepts. The Antichthon is the reverse world, where the surface of Shewstone is a world of air and water and light. The Antichthon is a world of earth and fire and darkness. What passes for the sky looks like a solid dome of rock, when you can even see it because it's often choked in volcanic black smoke. Volcanoes litter the landscape everywhere, and instead of seas and rivers of water, you have lava freely flowing on the surface. It looks positively infernal, but it's not hell. It's a living world with its own ecosystems and just regular people trying to live their own lives. And I have not worked on it extensively yet because it's not supposed to show up for years, so I can't tell you much about the cultures of the races living there quite yet. What I do know is that because it's the reverse world, their gods came from a different breed, so to speak. At the mythic dawn of the world, the families of gods were split when the earth was placed in the middle of them. The gods above had the luxury of being tied to these nice concepts like family, faith, justice, honor, because they lived in a world of light and water and plenty. The gods below lingered in darkness, and they had to tie themselves to more primal concepts necessary for survival. Hunger, self-preservation, reproduction, pride. And what little the clean, bright surface world knows of them, they filter through their own perception. To them, hunger is gluttony, self-preservation is greed, reproduction is lust, and pride is arrogance. To them, the dark gods below are demons, but in reality they are the children of a different, darker and harsher world. I talk a lot about verticality in this video, so there is another layer unique to my world, but which is a natural implication of its setup. We've talked about how in an aquatic environment you can still maintain a fairly two-dimensional battle landscape, only it's like everyone had fight. The way I treated these aquatic races is kind of similar to birds or insects. Birds fly and traverse over the landscape, but they still have to settle down somewhere. They have to build nests on the ground, they have to rest sometimes. But what if you kept going up? There's thousands of miles of air above you. If there's much less space for water and it gives birth to so many diverse life forms, what happens above us? Well, maybe not much if they don't have anything to settle on. But what if they do? As you may know by now, the world is encased in these crystal spheres, and sometimes, on a rare occasion, small chunks of these crystal spheres break off or slough off and fall below. Sometimes they reach the ground and crash and create a unique ecosystem based on these crystalline forms. One of the places with the most of these crushed crystals are the Shard Islands, home of the shard mines, but most of the time these crystals do not reach all the way to the bottom. Because magic is so pervasive and so strong up above, these crystals would often end up suspended in the air, and then new crystals would hang on to them and create a network of crystalline forms hanging high in the air, near the top of the dome. I call this formation the sky wall, and it is a little slice of the cosmos within the walls of the world. The ecosystem up there is strange and alien, full of shard mines, elementals, energy beings, or the starlings, the vaguely humanoid-shaped energy beings that still have close ties to the sky and the stars, being literally descended from the stars themselves being semi-divine beings. It's an alien landscape that the surface world doesn't really perceive or know much about, but it is another vertical layer uniquely developed to suit this design. There are several reasons for why I go into depth on all of my specific designs of this world. Firstly, if I think something is usually done wrong or is not done enough. What better example to give you than the one I made? I believe that's the way it should be done, because if I didn't, I would have done differently. And then I'd think I did it right again. Secondly, because I hope that my ideas, serving as examples of what you can do with these concepts, can inspire you to make your own designs. If you want to steal some of those ideas almost verbatim, be my guest. As long as you don't publish and sell my exact ideas, you are certainly free to use them in your home campaign. But you are even more welcome to use them as inspiration of what could be done with the tropes and designs that few people use. There are many other fantasy world building topics that I still want to touch on, some more closely related than others. The gods of Shewstone, or how I fixed the gods for a TTRPG, or how to do alignments differently, untying them from this weirdly mathematical morality of D&D. Or perhaps a deep dive into specific races, such as, for example, the few varieties of elves that you can really distill the many fantasy concepts of elves into. If there is any specific topic you'd like me to take a look into, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.